So I am Asha Dore. I am the editor of Parley Lit, and I am here with
Mary Mandeville. And gosh, I am a chiropractor certified to treat both animals and people. So I do that on the regular. Um, I have a wife and I am a wife. I am a gardener, tender of chickens. I think that matters to me. I'm a dog mom, and I'm the adoptive mom of two boys from foster care. One who isn't with us in any way anymore, and one who is a young man making his way in the world. And also, I write. And that means that all those things I just said, somewhere I have both written and published something about them. And that includes the chickens, the garden, and the dogs. Though I don't think either the chickens or the garden made it into this particular book.
I want chickens so badly.
Those my
It's such a
two
wonderful
things.
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad to be here to talk with you about your book, What Last. And it just came out this year, right?
Yeah. January 24th. Mm-hmm.
January, yeah.
Month.
I really appreciate it. And, just on a personal note, I have one of my children has diagnoses. He's 9. And I just found it so comforting to actually read a story about parenting a child who struggles with things like that because it's something that we often don't talk about. People often blame the parents. I appreciated that a lot.
Amen. Amen. And though this book, What Lasts, a narrative reliquary, and I want to talk about a little bit about that. But though this book
Yeah.
is about my story, and my son died, he decided to leave the world. And so on the face of it, you might think this book is for people who've lost someone to suicide, especially parents. And I really think it is, of course, and for anyone who's lost someone to suicide. But some of the feedback I've gotten, Asha, is from parents who have a living child in struggle. Talked to a woman recently, and her 34-year-old son just moved out of home, and still mom and dad worry every day. They see him every day to take care of things. And her relief on reading this book was a surprising to me and amazing to me and palpable. Like, oh, like she's not the only one who's struggling to find that path as a parent. You like where love is present, but you're trying to figure out how do you make love work in your life, and
Yeah.
especially as your kid gets to be an adult, like what is enabling and what is help and what is good and what isn't good. And oh my gosh, I know that I felt so lonely often, Asha, as a parent. Parenting this child is in his life. There were many struggles, and it was a lonely road. You think it's supposed to be all perfect and I don't know, rainbows and butterflies and Mother's Day plates and stuff, and it isn't. At least it isn't always.
Right. I so appreciated that about your book. I appreciated just narrative about kind of that meltdown behavior because, yeah, again, you just never see that. And it's like, that's right. That's what it's like. It's very
Yeah.
big and destructive, and it's very like challenging to find a space for that in yourself and figure out how to be next to it. But
Yeah.
also the part about consulting with so many different providers and then having somebody give up on someone, and just this sort of feeling that we believe that parenting is like an if you do this then your child will be this way, but that
Yeah.
isn't the case most of
No.
the time, and especially with kids with super high needs like this.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I'll just say too, I've written, so this little book's called a chapbook, and it's 50 pages. And so today I looked it up. How many words is that? It's under 13,000, 12,000 plus words. I have written more than 100,000 words on this topic. I've written more than 300 pages on this topic, written and written and written. And some of it is out because as a parent writing about your experiences with your child, some of the things are, in my personal estimation, are the child's purview. They are his story. Now,
Mhm.
I'm there every day. It's my story too. But some of the stuff is just too, it's his story, not mine. So it gets to go over here. And then some of it, I just whittled this down to a very particular story. And this very particular story does include someone who just can't even keep going, right? So it is also the loss, the struggle. And his struggle and my struggle with him needing to leave the world, needing to end his life. And how do you kind of put yourself back together and keep going when that's the case? And I have heard from many parents that they have that many times that they, after a child suicided, that they wanted to just put down their mantle and call it a day. And
yeah. It's so beautiful because there's both lyricism and kind of like this distance that is offered in these pages, because I think of the combination of narrative and these poetry kind of chapters, and that you go past the event and talk about those spaces with other grieving parents, and revisiting the tree and things like this, that I think are such a balm for people. It's really nice to be able to live vicariously. I've known people whose family members have unalived themselves, and it does really impact in a very specific way, it seems.
yeah, it also really impacts everyone. Here's the thing
Yeah.
that really surprised me. After Brandon died, so many people came to talk to me to tell me why it was their fault. Like, then they would tell me stories and like here's a story from an adult who said, I am so sorry. I promised to give him my old bike and I never followed through on that. And I was like mind blown. And it helped me a lot too, but I was mind blown at how powerful it is when someone that has touched you at all takes their life and you're like, where did I go wrong? How did I let them down? He had friends his age who were just devastated and who felt that they'd let him down. And in his last year, he was difficult to be with. He was really spiraling in mental illness and he was difficult to be with. And I said to his friends, like, did you know? did you have foresight? Did you understand what was going on? And was he being nice to you? He wasn't. And you were doing your best. The balm for me was to realize, oh, because I deeply and profoundly, and every cell, every blood cell, everything, it was my fault. If I would have done better, if I'd found the right therapist, if I had done something, I could have changed that. And when somebody thought that because they didn't give him a bike, that he might have killed himself, I was like, maybe we're all a little absolved. Maybe even I'm absolved. Maybe look how ridiculous this is. Look how everyone is blaming themselves. And a raw fact is this person was struggling so much. I'm not even sure he made the wrong decision. Like, what is a life of agony where you're constantly questioning what reality is? You don't feel loved. You feel like you're different from everyone. You can't find your way day after day after day. I don't know. But I'm also a long way from, I'm 10 years away.
Yeah.
If I was trying to talk to you or write this 10 years ago, it would be a hot mess of how much it's my fault. And also a lot of rage. I'd be blaming a lot of people too. I'd blame every therapist. I'd blame everybody.
Yeah.
And now I don't blame anybody. Because I think even if everyone did better and our social systems were better, and if we helped poor parents and addicted parents earlier and sooner, I still think that they're just people among us are going to some people are going to struggle, or they're going to have mental illness. That's organic, and we can't just magic wand it away by doing something better.
Yeah, I hear that. I think that's really powerful, and it's something that, like, I, in my both personal and professional life, I feel like I'm constantly soapboxing about, and then I'm like, am I right? I don't know, because I'm a speech pathologist. That's sort of my
Mhm.
like day job, and I feel like sometimes people are just born the way that they are, and
Yeah,
their skills don't match our society, or they
right.
are just in pain
Yeah,
forever in
yeah,
one way or another. And
yeah,
that's it's you know we have this strange perception, this just world hypothesis thing, where it's like people who are good don't deserve this, so then if you got it, then that means that somebody around you was bad. And it's just this, to me it's just
correct.
wrong thinking. It's just like I think I love your book because I think it holds a lot of space for like, this is just what was here. This is who this
Yeah,
person was. Hard
yeah.
and easy. I mean, the little car conversations were so delightful. I love them.
The car conversations, they were the best, the
Mhm.
best. I want to say something about the title, What
Yes,
Last?
yes.
Narrative Reliquary. I really felt, well, I took a class with Lydia Yuknovich. I love her. And it was on reliquaries. And a reliquary, what's a reliquary? A reliquary is a container for holy relics. It is a shrine. It could be as simple as a white cross beside a road, as long as it had a necklace or something that had touched the gone beloved. Then it's a reliquary. Then it's a shrine. It could be as big as St. Anthony's in Pittsburgh, I think, which is the largest home to like holy relics in the United States. But this little book is a narrative reliquary. It is a shrine. It is a little shrine to my son in stories, in words. And I just love that. And the titular essay is called What Lasts, and it's a
Mhm.
hybrid essay. And it is about what does last, just those little snippets. But the thing that lasts, the thing that just slays me because it's so obvious, so simple, and yet it's so true. The thing that lasts no matter what is the love that we put in. And and I also think that it's equal. Like we can't have my youngest sister is sort of yes, honey, I'm talking to you if you listen to this, talking about you. She I adore her. And she wants to keep her grief all like locked up. Like
Mhm.
could we not have this? Do we have to deal with this? It's so hard. We share the fact that our sister died just before Brandon, our other sister died of cancer. And my youngest sister just was like, I don't want to be sad. I don't want to cry. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. And she was like one of the last people to want to read this book because that's like, uh-oh, talking about it. And yet she did. And she called me up to say, I cried on every page. And Mary, I ultimately felt hopeful. And I really feel like there's something profound. We cannot have the deepest joy and the truest love if we don't have any sorrow and we don't have any grief. It's like we're just a closed little nut. And however big our spectrum is how big it is. But it means that if our love is this great over here, our sorrow is that great over on the other side. And what I keep hearing that surprises me from people about this little book, because I thought about it, oh, it's so sad. Like there's nothing that's like, yay, this is super happy and oh good, happy ending over here. It's not like that. And yet everyone who's read it says ultimately though, Mary, it's hopeful. And
Mhm.
I I'm a writer and it's a little hard for me to articulate why all this grief is hopeful, except maybe for that thing about the spectrum. We have to be full and wide and have the highest high. We have to be open to the lowest low because they're all there. Otherwise, they're like my sister is trying to do, squish it all into this little hard little thing and hold it all tight. And when you can do that, and then you're
Mhm.
close, hard and tight. So
That resonates with me because I also felt hopeful, and I thought, and it was like the word that I would have used was like kind of joyful, like there was like a space. And
mhm,
I'm like, what is this? Because it's not like well, we can learn from this, or, any kind of
Yeah,
like message like that, but I think it's because it's so authentic. It allows you to go like right down into the present moment of your own life. And it's sort of this invitation to me to just accept the whole of things, kind of like that spectrum you're talking about. I think so much time, and I learned this from so many mentors have said this to me, but it's just like about resistance. Like we just resist the moment that we're in. We
yeah,
resist the feeling that we have. We wonder if we're, especially as parents, doing it right, offering enough, offering too much.
yes,
And it's just sort of like, well, actually, we were actually just in the moment. And so that's that's like being alive.
right, exactly, exactly. Just being alive and doing the best we can. Somebody, who was it? Somebody famous, like, forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know until you knew it. You know, you didn't know what you didn't know. And so as parents, that's true too. Like we we don't come in, with a degree in child development and a degree in psychology, oh, and a degree in mental illness, or a degree in childhood trauma, all the things. We don't know everything about childhood cancer, all the things that might come along the way, that all we can do is the best we can do. But what we can do, and this was a learning for me, and it was a learning because both of my kids had had a lot of trauma, and they weren't my kids originally. Like this young man came to live with us when he was nearly 7 years old. He'd had many foster homes. He had a 9 out of 10 on the adverse childhood events scale. And there were some stories I told myself about that, about all the parts of it, about him not being really my child, about him. And there's truth and goodness and badness, all the things, because he really did have an original mom, and he had a life story before he ever laid eyes on me, and that's all true. And I always had to hold that with there's a certain sacredness to that too. Like I don't get to just start over, pretend that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I had stories in my head, and I had stories in my head about people who are whatever might want to say. They're behaving badly, they're
Mm-hmm.
disturbed, they're mentally ill, but most especially if they're behaving badly, if they do any bad things, they do anything harmful, they try to
Mm-hmm.
hurt somebody, anything like that. I was like, oh, and I learned it. Oh my God, I just learned I learned that inside every so-called bad person is a good person somewhere. And that I didn't know this for the longest time. I found out that I would be able to love Brandon forever through anything, even no matter what. If he murdered someone, I would still be there. I would have issues with the behavior. And
Yeah.
at one point where he was behaving really badly, I'm like, honey, there's certain things you have to pull yourself together, or else you have to go live in a locked place for everyone's safety. But
Mm-hmm.
I realized I would always know the good him. And I would
Yeah.
always, it was a lesson. I had not known that before. And I feel differently about everyone in the world, even some of the, ugh, I could name some famous names of people we might be judging right now. And I know that they have a story. That doesn't mean they get to be the president or certain things. They have a story, and I know they do. And there's a part of me that can see the little of them that got harmed somewhere. And anyway, it was really that was quite a journey. And that's part of what this is about. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he could do all the worst things, and it was a pretty worst thing. It's a pretty worst thing to hang yourself. And I still do love him, and I need him very much. I needed him to have a legacy. And for a while, I thought I was making his legacy. I'm going to make a legacy. And I want, how arrogant. Of course, he already made his own legacy, but what he doesn't have anymore is a voice or a megaphone. There's no way to communicate it anymore, but I do. So, and also, there have been a couple parents, and I know how lonely I was. And if there was anybody I would hope would read it, would be parents who are feeling lost for any reason, and not just the death of their child, but like the
Yeah.
struggles of their child, and feeling lost and feeling like it's their fault. Um, and feeling like they don't love enough. Uh, yeah, I would hope that this would be helpful. I hope that they would find solace. I would hope that they'd find company.
I agree. I think that this book should be given out to parents by like child like therapists who work with kids who have especially diagnoses of different, mental health conditions, but like ODD or DMDD, like these kinds of things, because I think that, I had a similar experience and I am in a similar experience with my child. I have 3 kids, and my first has autism kind of in the way that would have been diagnosed with like Asperger's before. So kind of like, artsy, kind of aloof,
Yeah,
but, easy according
easy.
to what we
Yeah,
typically say. And then my second child is like cognitively typical, but she has physical disabilities. She has arthrogryposis and like a genetic condition. And that was a
uh,
whole thing. And I was like, oh, I'm learning this whole new way of like being seen beside her. And then my son was born and he has these emotions, and it just seemed to bloom out of him, like he was like born like that. And I have a degree in child development. Like, and like I sought so much help and everything, and it's the same thing. Like I've seen him do things and he's really caring, like he experiences a lot of remorse, but I've seen him like, even just like throwing something at someone or breaking something or like coming at the dog or something. And I've had a similar thing where I'm like, if you hurt that dog, that would really bother me. But like
mhm,
I will still absolutely, like, I know that your heart is right there.
yeah.
Like I know your heart. And that is so hard to be inside of for
It's,
everyone.
it's so hard. It's so hard. Brandon was so interesting. He was affected by meth. And, at the time, I mean, he was born on meth. He tested positive for methamphetamines when he was born. And at the time, he was born in 1995 and we adopted him in 2002. And at the time, I would ask people and they'd be like, I don't know. We were sort of knowing what meth did to an adult brain. We were learning, but we didn't know what it did to a brain that was literally being made in that environment. Now we do. We do. But back then I'd ask specialists and they'd be like, but he was always kind to everyone who was more vulnerable than he was. So, for example, in his elementary school, there's a special needs class, profoundly disabled kids. He was like, he was so generous, so kind. Like, I'd be like, why can't you be like that with us? And like, why can't you be like that with your classmates? But nope, because they're not vulnerable. They don't need his help. But if you were a puppy or a chicken, great. Totally, he could totally show up. Um, but then as time progressed, I saw that he, and I know he saw it too. I know he saw it too. And I really think it's part of why he left. He was no longer 100% in control of what he did. And there was a time I challenged him. He did something he really shouldn't have done. And I said, what if those people's little dog had been there? Or he did some vandalism. What if their little dog had been there when you did that? What would have happened? And he's like, all appalled. And he's like, you know me, I would never hurt an animal. And I said, I know you right here, right now, talk this you. I see you, but I don't think this you was doing that stuff over there. Something else was going on. And he just froze. He went cold. And I knew he knew that that was true. And
Mhm.
I think that that was escalating. And the goodness in him, empathy, all that ability to see and make real choices. I know he was losing a grip on that.
Yeah.
And in my life, honestly, I don't know about you, but in my life, just, and this isn't a scientific study, but in my life, I know more people who have a family member, child, sibling, whatever, with serious mental illness that does not have drug effects, not have trauma, this is a thing that happens. It's life. It
Life.
happens. Does it happen with trauma? Yes. Does it happen with drugs? Sure. But my other son, he was in more homes, more foster care, and there were drugs, not meth, involved. And his brain is functioning real differently. He has, what I say to people, he has a brain to work with. My other son didn't really have a brain he could count on. It was like having an organ that doesn't work. Then if your liver doesn't work, you're in trouble. And if your, spleen doesn't work, you got trouble. And if your brain doesn't work, you got trouble. And he couldn't lean into it. My other son can lean into his brain and work on the trauma. And that's what he's doing. And so I know that this mental illness, and the trauma was impacted. I don't even know if it was increased. It was impacted by difficult circumstances in his early life, but more people that I know in the world struggle without that kind of history. So
absolutely. And that's why, I just feel like I'm going to get a copy for my son's therapist, because I just feel like that, whatever the reason behind it is, if it's happening, it's just there's this constant question of what do I do with this, and how do I apply what I know about being a human to the situation that is very common, but nobody talks about with nuance and practicality. And I feel like, a lot of people, when I was first having my babies, they talked about being a good enough mom or having a good enough birth. And I love that. That's wonderful. It's great. But being a good enough parent to a kid who has very big behaviors or emotions looks really different, because I sometimes think it's just like, I was there for that, and I did the least harm that I could as a parent, I think. Like I handled that okay that time. It's like,
exactly. I did okay. And every now and then, Asha, to just look at something and go, and I hope you do. And if you don't, please do this. Look, there are things that I know this. There are things that you have done brilliantly, things where you excel. And I know there were other days where you're kindly just 2 steps over doing a crap job. I know that. But also, I'm sure there are times where you've had epiphanies and you have been brilliant. So I hope you hold those times of brilliance and let them carry you through the next one. That's kind of like feels like a disaster.
No, I think that's a good thing. And I thought about that too, with reading about car conversations and being, in nature and stuff in your book. And I was just thinking, I realized that I struggle, when my son's medication stops working or something, and he's just in a bad mood for weeks or whatever. And I'm like, where did he go? He's gone. But then it's like, no, that stuff happened. It's okay. That was there. It's in him. It's in me. It's there. And just holding that as a thing that doesn't necessarily negate the struggle at all, but it's just both present and can carry you through the struggle. I think that's really smart and important.
And also take care of yourself. Always take care of yourself. I mean, me and walking my dogs, that was sometimes that was the only good thing in my day. There were really days where I'd be like, well, at least I took the dogs and we walked along the river and we saw an osprey, and for an entire hour, nothing bad was happening. Nobody was screaming. It was all safe. The principal didn't call me. It was all good. And I think that's so critical too, to remember how critical you are, how important you are, how you need to be, all parents need to be nurtured. And also it's what we show our kids too. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself.
That's really smart.
My fondest hope. So I really appreciate that you're going to share this with someone, because my fondest hope, so, this is a book published by a very small publisher. And so you are now looking at the entire marketing and publishing PR department. And marketing and PR are not my strong suits or my interests. And I know there are people that I don't know who are just like waiting. They're just like, yes, I want to read that book, except one problem, I don't know it exists. So
Mhm.
I'm really grateful to be talking about it here with you, and just like have people share it so that somebody that they don't know and I don't know can find their way to it if they need it. If it's going to
Yeah,
serve them.
absolutely. How would you imagine a movie or TV show of this book? But I'm going to tell you right now, and like you could, I'd love to hear your answer if you want to answer that. But
Yeah.
we've been making these little animated movies, and I'm just like, I want this to be right next to that other amazing animated movie on Netflix. But it's about a family after they lost their child in a school shooting, and I think, and it's just
Oh,
a very
is it several years
short.
old? Is it several years
I
old?
think
I
think so. I
might
think it just won an
might have
award
seen
though.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very simple, but I just was like, as I was, looking through this again, I was like, this is one of those things that should be like a short, or could be like a short film or animation that is just like gives people a different story about something that is feels untouchable sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear what you think too about that.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, as I said earlier, I have written hundreds of pages. So I've written sort of the entire story of like, this is the story of adoption, and these are like all the
Mhm.
day-to-day struggles and the various things and the bazillion therapists. And here's some quotes of the things that they told us for like that were so useless. And and then one, I have to say one, I just have to say, not all therapists completely let us down. We had one out of the many who was just like amazingly right on. She was amazing. She did EMDR and another sort of out there process healing. It's just like almost voodoo, but I am telling you, they were starting to work, but it was very late in Brandon's life.
Mhm.
Anyway, so there's whole 300 pages. And sometimes I think about that. If I could find a way, and maybe I will sometime, maybe I'll write it as a novel, because I want to provide a certain level. I mean, Brandon's dead, and I don't know that telling his story can do him any more harm than that, right? And yet
Mhm.
there's a certain level of privacy, or like, again, what's his story, what's
Mhm.
mine. Also, we had another son, so if I'm writing a true story, I either leave him out, because I'm really clear with this living son, his stories. Even I have a couple stories I want to tell about this kid. Freaking brilliant stuff on my part, because I learned from child number one, and I have another child, and there are things I did differently and better because I
Mhm.
learned it. And yet all those stories are, they're they're private because it's too much of his life, and they're not sharing it because it's his,
Mhm.
not mine. But maybe a novel, and the novel could definitely be a movie. Then I want
Mhm.
like big time, people in it. And who I'd want to play Brandon would be what's this kid's name? Finn Wolf. What's his name? He was in Stranger Things, and he even looks something like Brandon. Lovely
Mhm.
young guy. He's a little bit older than Brandon was when he left the world. Um, but we'll see. We'll see. Like
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I'm gonna go back and do that. Like I said, I
Mhm.
wrote the whole thing as a memoir, and I feel like if I try to put that in the world, it needs to be a novel, and it
Mhm.
pulls back and it protects real identities.
Smart.
Because that seems like the only fair thing to do.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, I would love to read that, and I think it would do so much good work for the reasons that we've been talking about, just because
Yeah.
we don't have. I mean, I've never, ever seen a kid who is not ill-intentioned, who doesn't end up necessarily doing anything to anyone that is like criminal or whatever, just a kid who's struggling, whose parents are really trying to help them.
Mhm.
Ever. And it's always like if a kid is acting up, they end up being like a serial killer or something like really, really
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like usually like a why did they do this thing? And we go back there, and
Correct. Correct.
it's it just our story about this is limited to these are bad people.
Yes, it
And
is. Yes.
I just think that, you know, that is that's just limited, very limited, missing a lot. A
Yeah.
lot of people too, millions of people.
Yes. And like all the people who are struggling and all the people who love them, which is,
Mhm.
probably about 6 degrees, it's probably, in suicide, they talk about um, the six, that there are six people, six, first ring people. It's mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. Usually it's that like nuclear family, but there's boyfriends, girlfriends,
Mhm.
non-binary gender friends, but there's about six people in the inner circle who are affected by a suicide. And don't you think there's at least six people on the inner circle of someone who has not suicided, but who is struggling? So someone who's got schizophrenia or bipolar or any disorder, or even an undiagnosed something that's troubling them. There's a bunch of people right there who are deeply and profoundly affected by that.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a huge thing, and it's weird how quiet we are about it, um, as a society. Like, such a strange
Yeah.
thing to dismiss. But I have this belief that we're moving into a space where ability in every way that you can define that word is going to become something that we understand better and better as like a thing that is not only marginalizing, but that is so common that the struggle can be spoken about as much as any other point of marginalization.
Oh,
It doesn't have to
totally.
be unspoken.
Totally. I see a really big, burgeoning movement to address neurodivergence. So I'm
Mhm.
really happy about that. And I don't see it as big in other realms yet, but it's opening the door to
Yeah.
say, yeah, look at us in all our spectrum of different abilities, what we're good
Mhm.
at, what we suck at, what we can do, what we can't do, what our strengths are. But there's not just one tidy little description where everything is. I don't even know. I don't even have the words, because I was going to say able-bodied, but you see, there are different abilities that come with different situations. Good, strong abilities. A lot of people who
Mhm.
say with autism have real strong points the rest of us do not have. So it's
Yes,
not
I
that
super agree
people
with that.
are less abled and we're, disabled. It's
Mhm.
um, the term differently abled is really apt. And we're,
Yeah.
we're way behind in mental illness, though. Way, way, way behind. We're way behind, and we still think it's a character defect. We still have the pall of like moral and character defect hanging over it. It's
Mhm.
somehow, if you would just get your attitude together, you could just choose. And we aren't recognizing you can no more choose that than you can choose to make your liver enzymes do a thing that they're not doing. Yeah,
I'm gonna grab
yeah.
my
I mean,
plug while you
until
talk.
we get rid of that sort of ancient, sort of primal, like, and lack an ununderstanding where we decided it was like a God thing or, a bad blood thing. You alluded to something about somebody must be bad.
Mhm.
There was an old thing that I was raised with: the sins of the father are visited on the child. So we've got this idea of like badness, contamination, and it's much simpler than that. It's like your insulin system just doesn't work.
Mhm.
And we won't get anywhere in addressing it until well, I don't know. We have to we just keep rattling the chains and rattling the cage so that we do get somewhere to say, how about a little insulin for this case? Or how about a little,
Yeah, I think a lot about the nervous system as the system that we kind of mythologized for a long time and are starting to see as a piece of our body, in a
Mhm.
more concrete way. But like our belief about, behavior and emotions and emotional regulation are just now starting to develop in like a modern way
Yeah,
with our ideas about everything else, because it's very rooted in biology. It's not magic that makes people have meltdowns. It's
right,
just there's a biological system that we haven't figured out to the degree that we
right.
really probably should have, but we weren't asking questions. Instead, we were just lobotomizing people and stuff like
Yeah,
that for so long
yeah,
that because we couldn't handle the behavior,
yeah.
so
One of the things we discovered with, or, that post Brandon's death, this information has come to be better understood. That methamphetamine, one, it affects a developing brain in a very, very particular way. It has a very particular area of the brain that has to do with mood regulation and self-regulation, and also whether you suffer delusions or not. So it's fascinating. So it tends to shrink that and make that part of the brain less effective. But methamphetamine also disrupts the dopamine delivery system. And one of the things that Brandon always um, complained about, first I thought, get your attitude together, for God's sake. You haven't been in trauma for years. He would say, I'm never happy, and everything's a disappointment. And I got all prepared to be happy about this. I'm not happy. And he'd shake his fist, I'm never happy. And one day, I don't know what exactly happened, but I got it. I understood. I thought, oh my God, he is telling me the truth. He is not having a bad attitude. He is trying to communicate that he is never happy. And that day I started asking people, I asked his physician, I asked the therapist, do you think there's something wrong with his dopamine delivery system? So when we tell a funny joke, we feel good. When we take a hike to the top of Mount Tabor and we do all that work, get all the endorphins, we feel good. And what if Brandon never does? I am clear at this point that he never did. And that seems like a very particular kind of hell. Like everything that you think is going to be, and you see other people, it's good for them, and you want it to be good for you, and you're trying, and it doesn't happen. Again, back to like the insulin or something, because you literally don't have the thing in your body to make it happen. Yeah. So I asked a long time ago too, before Brandon was dead, is there any way, can we replace that? Is there like a dopamine replacement? And only one person, one therapist, yay, particular therapist, she's like, we're really early. You're asking the right question. Unfortunately, no one has that answer, but people are working on it right now. So yeah. My hope is that, like many other things, that we will find our way through some of these things, to real answers, and not just answers that like suppress emotions or suppress bad behavior or sedate people or anything. Not just medications to like tamp down the symptoms we don't want, but hopefully to actually help people so that they can function better, feel better, and function. And everybody's on their own journey. And we think as parents it's ours, but it's totally 100% theirs.
Right. And I feel like that's like the biggest message of the book, is just like this acceptance, this level of acceptance that is so rare to put into words. Like it almost feels like the whole book was necessary to make the definition of what the word acceptance means as a person who loves anybody, like to just like fully accept. That's what that looks like. That's your book, in my opinion. And
that's great to hear. Is there like often I still feel like, oh, it's still such a work in progress, and there's so much else to say. And though I am at a greater stage of acceptance than I was, I now accept that. Okay, most days, most of the time, I accept I did the best I could. I really did, and I've been through it 8 ways to Sunday. And what I believe now is, no matter what I did, no matter what my partner, no matter what we did, Brandon had his life to live. And I mean, I have the gift of time. I have the gift of, things that I and society are learning, things we've learned about meth. And I take all the things that I know 10 years later, and I go back, I'm going to go back, magically time travel, and insert all this knowledge into the past. And every time I do it, Asha, I come up with, we have the same end. I really think we have the same end. And I don't know what I believe about the afterlife and blah, blah, and whether we have reincarnation or I don't know, this is what I learned in childhood. Oh, we die and we go and we're saints and we go sit at the right hand of God for the rest of eternity. Boring. But I do wonder if my son did complete his purpose. And I can see a few pretty grand purposes that he would have accomplished in his life. And I don't say that I know that because I definitely don't. But I wonder, like if there's meaning and if there's somebody out there, and if we have souls that go on and choose things, he might have come to do some jobs that were going to be really hard, probably like a Navy SEAL or somebody who goes in to do a mission and then they get there and you're like, oh, it's harder than I even thought. Oh, also very dangerous. Oh, I'm going to die. But you were brave and you had a job to do and you did it. And I do wonder if lives that look hard to us or ridiculously unfair, and I don't say this to excuse anything. We don't excuse abuse or, terrible systems that fail us. But do lives that look terrible have a purpose? And did they accomplish their purpose? Even though for us, it's hard to see, or we wanted it to look different. Um, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it does. And I love the idea of opening a space for that wondering. I'm in one of my first workshops with Lydia, she used this motion with her hand and she was like, just trouble the question.
Uh-huh.
And that is something that has always stuck with me, especially with that word that's like troubling it, because it's just, I think that it's beautiful to do that because it gives people a lot of grace and
Yeah.
opportunity to see more parts of like the kaleidoscopic impact that you have in the world. It narrow perspectives I don't think help anybody, even if they're helpful sometimes, like when
Right.
we're getting over things. um, but like I've been in a fair amount of rage in my life after grief, and I think that there's use for that, and I think that's sometimes the most narrow perspective you can have is to be in a rage. But
Yes.
it does help us get past grief, I think, sometimes. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to say to people, go buy it somewhere. Go get it.
yeah.
Look it up. You can just look it up. What Lasts, a narrative reliquary. So you can get it here in Portland. You can get it at Powell's Broadway Books and Annie Bloom's, but you can also buy it in perpetuity. It's a small publisher and they use a little, publishing house where you go order it from them and they send it
I
off
love
to you.
that. That's wonderful. um yeah, I feel like really, like, I love everything that we talked about. I think it was perfect. Would you like to read some from it? I love all the books that I read and talk to people about, but this book is a rare view to me that is so important for people to see.
Anytime someone asks me to read, there's a piece I particularly adore. I don't know if I want to read the whole thing because it would probably take 7 or 8 minutes, but maybe I'll read a section of it. And it's a braided essay. It starts about a third of the way through, and it's called Inheritance. And it's the thread of it is breath, and also the lack of breath as it had gone through my life and the generations of my life, and people who didn't keep their breath and people like me who for some reason did. And I just have always, it's a funny thing, like in your own writing, if you get used to it, even the hardest things, sometimes you're immune to it, but I'm never immune to this piece. So I'm gonna read little snippets of it. It's called Inheritance. I crave breath, not just the ordinary in and out, chest rising and falling, inspiring and exhaling. I want to huff and puff, to pant, to strain, collarbones rising, ribs expanding, diaphragm tenting, lungs gasping. I want this hard breathing enough to chase it every day by running, hiking, jumping, pedaling. Calf and thigh muscles contract and push until my breath comes hard and ragged. I'm willing to work hard for breath. I want to know I'm alive. My younger brother hung like a breath, like a fog in the corner of my bedroom where the ceiling met the walls above the door. Chubby, blonde, yet filmy, he morphed from infant to toddler to boy as he fluttered there where I couldn't not see him. Of course, he wasn't really there. He died when I was only 2 years old. He stopped breathing suddenly in the middle of a night, his death a mystery, a thing my parents didn't talk much about, except to say, Alfred died from crib death. Chronic bronchitis plagued my child body. Bouts of pneumonia inflamed the air sacs of my lungs, filled them with fluid. I had cough, fever, chills. I spent the winter holidays in the hospital the year I was 8. In my young adulthood, childhood rhinitis clawed at my nose, my sinuses, my bronchioles and lungs. Like my baby brother, I struggled to breathe. Unlike my baby brother, I lived. We found their fingerprints all around the hole. That image, the fingerprints left by 2 boys grasping the edges of broken ice, boys who frantically tried to pull themselves onto a too thin layer of frozen water that cracked under their grip, haunted my imagination. The most gruesome detail in the story of 2 boys I never met, my father's brothers, Alfred and Arthur, the teens who never grew up, never had children of their own, never became my uncles, because frigid water filled their lungs and snuffed out their breath. 52 years after Alfred died, I asked my mom to describe what happened. She sucked in a breath of surprise, and her eyes rimmed with tears. Half a century after her baby died, giving the lie to her clipped explanations of crib death over the years. A feeling had woken my mom and sent her cribside, where her baby's chest no longer rose and fell, while Dad drove frantically to the hospital back in the black and white days before 911. Mom felt Alfred slip away. Drive carefully, Charles, she told my dad. It's too late now. Ma'am, the chaplain on my front porch said, I'm so sorry. Your son has taken his life. My sweet, troubled, handsome 19-year-old son, adopted after chaotic early years, throwaway years, the nobody cares about poor white trash, meth addicts, and foster kid years. He was left to languish for 7 long years with inadequate food, clothing, care. His boy body touched in ways it never should have been. His meth-addicted mom admonished to do better, but not given any tools to do better. Trauma followed him every day of his life. The meth that coursed through his developing arteries and veins, his developing nerves and brain, erupted in paranoia, in mood swings, in delusions in his late teens. How badly he must have wanted to leave this life, how he must have lacked inspiration to put that noose around his neck and step off that branch, airway slowly compressed until he suffocated, unable to breathe by choice. What a choice. When you find out that your son has hung himself, you run away from knowing. You tell yourself you'll race in a triathlon, and so you run. You pound out miles on riverside trails. You plan to pound your grief into submission, disappear your grief with breath. But then the universe sticks out a toe, catches your running feet, trips you, and down you go. Your torso rams into a sawed-off log on the way, and your ribcage explodes. You're down in the cold mud, broken. A punctured lung and too many rib fractures to even count, the ER doctor says. You're a mess. You think you can't breathe, but you can. It hurts like hell, each breath sharp and stabbing, but the air comes in and goes out. You can still breathe. Because you can, you do. You just keep on breathing. It feels like an obligation. It feels like a privilege. And so you breathe.